The rain had been steady all night, a soft percussion against the glass, the kind of sound that usually calms me. I was sitting at my desk, mic angled toward the old recorder, trying to capture the texture of that weather. The hiss of water, the muted crackle of distant cars passing on wet asphalt, the quiet hum of the desk lamp beside me. Then, almost too soft to catch, another sound entered the mix. A low vibration. A hum stretched thin, as though it rose through the floorboards and settled inside the static of the room. At first, I thought it was interference from the equipment. I've dealt with that before: loose cables, nearby transformers, even cell towers leaking signals into the line. I shifted the wires, tapped the mic housing. Nothing changed. The hum didn't move with my adjustments. It pressed steady, exact, as if it belonged there more than I did. I leaned closer, headphones clamped tight, breath suddenly shallow. Beneath the static, I could hear intervals. The tone wasn't flat. It rose, fraction by fraction of a note, then fell again, repeating, waiting. I checked the meters. The pulse was not random noise. Each spike appeared in the waveform like a signature. Even spacing. Consistent peaks. I wrote down the timings on a scrap of paper. 7.2 seconds apart. Again and again, perfectly aligned. That's not how interference works. Noise scatters. Electricity stutters. Nature doesn't count time with such precision. Only something controlled, engineered, could leave that pattern carved within the rain. I played it back 3 times. Each time, the cycle repeated without error, as exact as machinery breathing. Curious, I opened old backup logs from last year, files I had nearly forgotten about. Room tone tests, environmental captures. Buried among them was a night of playback with the same strange interference. I remembered growing frustrated with those files and abandoning them, blaming faulty gear. Now, with fresh ears, I scrubbed through carefully. The pulse was there too, faint but unmistakable. This time the date stood out. June 13th. I froze. That was no ordinary day. I typed the date into search notes, cross-referencing online archives. The screen confirmed it: Geneva. A publicly documented run of CERN's collider. I sat back, rain still drumming its rhythm outside, while the hum replayed through my headphones. My hands shook as I leaned into the mic. I spoke softly, trying to hold on to the calm tone I use when describing technical details. The reassurance was more for me than anyone else. The evidence continued to build itself in front of me, layer by layer, unasked for, undeniable. This wasn't interference. It was something mapped directly across timescales. Machine to storm. Lab to living room. The realization tightened my chest. What did it mean that a test buried under the landscape of Geneva resonated here, faint and submerged under rainy static? I tried to rationalize. Could international power lines carry harmonic bleed? Could thunderclouds scatter frequencies across hemispheres? In theory, yes. But this pattern wasn't scattering. It was transmitting with intention, stable enough to preserve its architecture, even after traveling through everything between there and here. I pressed the recorder against the glass. Water streaked down like veins against stone. Strangely, the beat of the rain seemed to bend toward the pulse. Drops struck almost in counterpoint, as if the storm was taking cues. I whispered a description into the condenser mic, my voice close to breaking. For the first time during a recording, I wasn't sure if I was documenting or participating. My words layered over the hum, weaving into the pattern, and I couldn't escape the sense it was listening back. I returned to the spectrogram analysis. Blues and greens glowed in the graph, with narrow spines of bright yellow where the hum cut deepest. Not natural. Not faint background movement, not mechanical buzz. It looked too deliberate, carved like someone sketching with sound. Rising arcs mirrored, then falling in echo. The precision chilled me. A machine might make such a structure. A mind certainly could. And yet, staring at the image on screen, I had the strange conviction that this wasn't built or spoken. It was something else. Something already alive, every attempt at dismissal dissolved. The pattern sat there, demanding attention. Every 7.2 seconds it returned, faithful like an unseen metronome, steady in the static. I leaned into the mic again. My voice cracked. "It feels alive," I admitted quietly, breaking my own rule of neutrality. My whisper echoed back in real time through the headphones, fragile and small against that impossible pulse. The rain swelled harder, wind pushing against the building. The tap of water along the sill became syncopated, almost like accompaniment to the hum beneath. I felt suspended between storm and signal. I couldn't tell anymore where the weather ended and the recording began. I shuddered, but didn't switch off the recorder. If anything, I pulled it closer. The old log still gleamed on my screen. June 13th. I couldn't look away from the name attached to that date. Large Hadron Collider, Geneva. I never cared much for the conspiracies around it. I rarely give time to speculation I cannot ground in evidence. But sitting there, my ear filled with cycles measured in surgical symmetry, I felt the first quiet quake of purpose rise in me. I wasn't stumbling into another theory or myth. I was catching a thread woven into proof. My breathing steadied, though my body remained tense. I knew enough to recognize the gravity. To ignore it was unthinkable. To follow it was dangerous. Every spike of the hum urged me closer towards something waiting at its origin. Some door, some threshold in sound, not stone. I clenched my fists on the desk, paper water damaged under my palms. This wasn't random interference. This was the beginning of a pattern, waiting to be followed. The signal had been haunting me since that first night, replaying in loops through my headphones, crawling under the edge of everything I tried to do. I couldn't put it aside. I couldn't treat it as a curiosity any longer. I needed to know if the precision in the pulse tied directly to something measurable, something larger. That meant cross-checking. And cross-checking meant digging deeper into records that weren't meant to be read casually. I opened folders I hadn't looked at in years, backups from travels, clipped articles from scientific newsletters, even stray receipts stored without purpose. It surprised me how quickly a picture formed. The old June recording matched too neatly with official schedules, right down to the very minute a test run began. The Collider's press releases are meant for the public, simplified, smoothed. But the data hidden underneath speaks clearly if you listen. Each time I traced that hum in my files, my notes redirected me to a corresponding run listed in Geneva. Times aligned in full sync, repeating across months. Not an accident. Not coincidence. Hidden in plain sight, I began reconstructing an itinerary. Airfare invoices, hotel bookings, travel documents released by researchers. A rhythm of movement across Europe synced perfectly with the pulses in my private recordings. I spoke each detail aloud as I cataloged them, feeling the words stack like stones in a wall. Someone had been there each time a pulse imprinted itself into the signals I gathered. A choreography beneath the surface of travel, public yet invisible. Too precise to dismiss, the hum lingered in my ears as I picked up the phone. There was one person left who might still answer me. He hadn't spoken to me in 3 years, and even then, our conversations skated the edge of rules he couldn't afford to break. He once worked directly on the Collider's beamline. He knew the noises it made inside, the way magnetic coils could rattle, the deep bass of proton beams folding space within stone. If anyone could dismiss my fears or confirm them, it would be him. When he answered, his tone carried that exhausted weight I remembered. We exchanged brief formalities before I cut to it. I told him I had captured something strange, something I needed to compare against his memory. I pressed the recorder's speaker to the phone, let the rising and falling tone fill the gap between us. For a long stretch he said nothing. I almost thought the call had dropped. Then, faint but unmissable, came the words, "That shouldn't exist outside the tunnel." The room seemed to contract. His voice carried the brittle edge of someone breaking a rule, even by acknowledging me. I waited for him to continue. He didn't. Only a rushed breath filled the line before he hung up. I sat there, foam dead in my hand, the rain beginning to strike the roof hard enough to echo through the ceiling. His reaction played in my head, repeating with every drop. Not surprise at interference, but certainty that what I held was impossible. I turned back to my files, feverish now, ignoring the damp air pressing in around me. The timestamps couldn't be ignored. Each pulse coincided not just with general test days, but with specific documented runs, precise to the minute. I compared time zones, accounted for distance, even factored in delays. The alignment held firm. The signal had not bled randomly through the world. It repeated, traced cleanly across controlled events beneath Geneva soil. I narrated my thought process into the recorder, voice low as though I spoke to an unseen presence listening in the room. Each layer narrowed the range of explanation. Either I had uncovered an accidental broadcast, a leak of energy pushed too far beyond, or it was something deliberately engineered, a beacon built into the collider's bones. One option terrified me. The other chilled me deeper. My notes rustled as I shuffled between them, rain punctuating the silence with harsh bursts. The pattern beat in my skull until it felt like my heart had adjusted to a new rhythm. Too exact. Too loyal to a schedule. I checked once more, reading the dates aloud, hearing the numbers slide out of my own throat. There was no human error here. No fabrication. The hum did not wander, it obeyed. I pressed my forehead to the desk, the wood cool against my skin, and tried to steady my breathing. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence cornered me. If the hum reached me from Geneva, it meant the collider reached further than anyone admits. If the technician's whisper was true, then the machine was bleeding pieces of itself outward, seeding tones into the fabric of storms and signals. My gut tightened as I pictured it happening again, with each scheduled test. Over and over. The risk was no longer whether the anomaly existed. That was settled. The risk was whether it would stay confined. My only option was escalation, finding more proof, gathering another recording from someone else, somewhere else, so unmistakable that argument would collapse under it. I closed my notebooks, the sound loud against the hum still drifting faint in the headphones. My path forward was clear, though I hated it. I needed undeniable evidence. The rain pounded harder, a restless percussion that seemed in conversation with the pulses. I shut down the computer, yet the sensation didn't fade. The pulse lived behind the silence, waiting. In the dim glow of the lamp, I realized there was no going back. Whatever I had stumbled into, it had just stepped closer, and it would not remain hidden much longer. The days slipped into nights and back again, and I barely noticed the difference anymore. I kept my headphones on at all hours, eyes fixed to the glow of aging screens littered with forums few people still visit. Places where hobbyists post ghost signals, stray bursts of static, stray logs of unexplained intrusions on shortwave. Normally these corners of the internet feel like driftwood washed up after a storm, fragments of obsession with no coherence. But now any scrap might matter. My pulse quickened each time I saw the word hum. Each time someone mentioned storms. Each time a file appeared without explanation. That is how I found the post from a man in Finland. The thread was only 3 entries deep and several weeks old. Simple title: Strange hum during storm, need help. I clicked it expecting nothing. Inside was a text description of a thunderstorm near his home outside Turku, and embedded below, a recording. Just a handheld shortwave running across open bands while rain hammered outside. The moment I pressed play, I felt the same tension in my chest I'd felt in those Geneva-lined files. The timbre was unmistakable. A low bass note rising fractionally, then falling, repeating with purpose. He caught less than 2 minutes, but it was enough. I pulled up my own files, layered them into comparison software I know like breathing now. The traces unfolded on screen, stacked like translucent skin. The colors matched almost exactly, each spike nestled where I expected it to be. Interlacing harmonics flared where the sound's overtones grew brighter, knitting together patterns that ordinary interference cannot sustain. I narrated carefully into the mic, describing what I was seeing. The chart lit in curtains of blue and green, with sudden streaks of gold. The finished sample, though captured hundreds of miles from Geneva, bloomed with the same shape as mine. Even the intervals matched. 7.2 seconds. Hushed, deliberate, mechanical. I let the files play alternately for several minutes, even though I already knew what the answer was. Not coincidence. Not local interference. Something continuous, carrying across borders under cover of weather dot. My thoughts ran in parallel with the tones, circling back again and again to the force required to move a signature like this. To persist in storms, bounce against clouds, and still arrive with resolution intact. My fingers trembled as I adjusted the levels, pulling smaller details from beneath the dominant crest. Faint whispers of repetition across higher bands, barely visible but consistent. Not random splash, not atmospheric noise. A key, layers stacked upon each other. An architecture of sound buried like scaffolding within storms. I saved the files carefully, labeling them with dates, times, and coordinates. Each keystroke felt ritualistic, the act of preserving something larger than me. Previous hums had locked themselves to collider events, but this signal emerging from Finland implied something else entirely. The bleeding had left the womb of Geneva. The hum no longer cared about borders or distance. Structures had shifted past an underground ring of stone and metal. They were moving through weather, latching onto clouds like carriers. The realization gnawed at me, hot and unshakable. If the signal rides on storms, then it is no longer trapped by geography. Weather travels. Wings carry memory with them across oceans. A pulse repeating faithfully every 7 seconds could encircle the world without ever faltering. It would be invisible, unmeasurable to those who don't already know it's there. Only those who accidentally tune to the right frequencies would notice. Only the few desperate enough to listen. I leaned closer to the mic, explained every detail slowly, guiding whoever might hear me through the bloom of colors on screen. I spoke gently about how the spectrogram formed a distinct lattice that mirrors itself from Geneva to Finland. I admitted the fear prickling my skin as I laid the images side by side. I couldn't help but say it aloud. Interference does not cross borders like this. Accidents do not repeat at 7-second intervals. Static does not draw the same picture twice across thousands of kilometers that the rain outside my own window intensified as if punctuating the thought. I turned off the lights in the room, leaving only screens to illuminate the desk. The recordings looped, the hum spreading wide in the air, settling deep in my chest. I shut my eyes, listening for shifts, imagining the distance it had traveled. Every ear closer to tuning in would become part of its passage. Every recording labeled now bound me tighter to an unfolding pattern one. Couldn't turn away from. The technician's whisper still echoed in me. What I held should not exist outside the tunnel. Yet here it was, thriving in Nordic weather, identical in voice, identical in rhythm, identical in defiance of confinement. My sense of safety shrank. If the collider once produced the first note, it may have done something worse without meaning to. It may have opened a door too wide, allowing sound to escape, and once escaped, sound does not return where it came from. It spreads. I documented like a scientist, but my insides trembled like a witness. Each click of file save, each redundant backup on drives and SD cards, felt like drawing inscrutable diagrams without comprehension of the whole. Still, I labeled. Finland underscore, hum underscore run underscore 04. Comparison stack 3. Notes cross-checked 23 times. This was not the time to doubt discipline. Data is memory, and memory may be all we have left when other records are erased. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, I realized I hadn't stood up in hours. My legs prickled with pins of exhaustion, but I sat rooted. I let the tones loop in my ears again, hearing between them fabric stretch too taut. Each stretch whispered a warning I couldn't neatly phrase but felt deeply. This isn't production. This isn't mere resonance. This is a process of opening. The collider didn't merely emit a tone. It tore a seam that still resonates, a seam not loyal to Geneva, not tethered to stone. A seam that hums within storms. And the seams, once opened, do not close. The storm had thinned to a softer rain, a steady tapping against the glass that felt more like breath than weather. After hours of reviewing spectrograms, I wanted silence. But silence no longer existed. The hum was with me now always, etched into the back of my hearing, hollow and patient. I sat at the desk, resting the recorder in my palm, letting it replay. 7.2 seconds, then again. My tired mind began to drift, chasing meaning where none should be. And then I froze. It wasn't just a hum anymore. Hidden beneath one cycle, stretched so faintly I could have missed it, a familiar pattern surfaced. Tones bled into vowels. At first, my brain dismissed it as shapes inside noise pareidolia, the human instinct to carve faces into shadows, voices into static. But I knew the cadence of that rhythm as well as I knew my own. I pushed my headphones tighter, heart climbing my throat. I knew those words. They weren't clear. Not yet. But the rhythm was engraved in me from childhood. It didn't matter how distorted, how submerged, how impossible. My mother's voice was in the hum. She'd been gone for more than a decade, but I heard her. Faded, cracked, cut short by static, but hers nonetheless. The breath caught in my own throat came out sharp on the mic. I pressed pause, hands trembling. Then replay, again, until certainty rooted itself in my bones. She used to say that phrase when storms rolled in. Sometimes at bedtime, sometimes to calm my nerves. It was ordinary, like so much of living. Fragile words that carried weight only because they belonged to her. But no tape of it exists, no recording survives. The only place it could live was memory. Yet here it was, archived not in me, but in a signal tearing itself across weather. Each repetition from the boost made the impossible replay, carved inside interference, like it had always been waiting there. I swallowed hard and admitted into the mic what I was hearing, though it strained my voice. Explaining it felt like betraying myself, as if saying it aloud risked hearing nothing but delusion in return. But I knew its rhythm, the length of the stretch, the part where she let her voice dip a little as if to reassure me. A phrase no one else could guess, tucked away in our vanished time. I slowed the file down. Harsh lines of static stretched and warped, each pause drifting like air tunnels down a long corridor. That's when the syllables aligned. Imperfect, broken, but unmistakable once my ears fell into the rhythm. A human phrase emerging from mechanical repetition, an intrusion of memory stitched by something that shouldn't know me. Even describing it now makes my chest ache. It wasn't random interference. The frequencies were shaping themselves into doors, and one of them opened here. My hands sweated against the recorder casing. The microphone picked up every small breath around me. That intimacy was the only thing tethering me as my thoughts spun heavier, more frantic. If memory could bleed through storm signals, what does that say of boundaries we trusted to be firm? What else could slip past once memory itself is let loose as a frequency? I closed my eyes and listened again, letting her words pull me into the shape of their echo. And in that surrender I confessed aloud, my voice cracking the truth of why I couldn't stop chasing these sounds. It had nothing to do with conspiracy or science. It had to do with her absence. Grief that never dulled, only shifted, reappearing in empty moments like this one. I told the mic what I'd never told anyone. I keep recording because I want her back. I keep listening because some small traitorous part of me hopes the hum will return her. Tonight, it almost did. The rain grew heavier, each drop thumping with density, pairing with the intervals of the hum until they created a rhythm both familiar and unbearable. For a moment I wanted to switch the machine off, rip the batteries out, and walk away before I lost myself completely. But my hand wouldn't move. My grief pinned me to the desk. Memory had been made tangible in a way photographs never managed. It had pierced a barrier no one understands. It may have been an accident, but once presented, it could not be undone. I whispered again into the mic, softer now. Not analysis, not documentation. A confession more than anything. If the collider drags fragments of lives into the open through sound, if it lets the lost echo inside clouds, then maybe it is no longer a machine. Maybe it is a mouth. A passage from what was to what should no longer be accessible. My mother was only the beginning. If she could slip through, what else waits behind the static, pressing against the membrane, asking to be let in? The hum cycled again, and with it, her phrase. Broken, partial, stretched, but present. My heart locked on it, painful but grounding. I spoke quieter with each word, feeling tears heat the corners of my eyes. I don't know yet what the signal wants, if it even wants anything at all, but I know it is not empty. I know it remembers, and memory is never passive. It is reaching through storms like a hand through gauges of static. The recording pulled me further down, one loop after another. With every replay, it became harder to believe it was mistake or imagination. The conviction thickened like marrow. It was real. Whatever this force is, it made my memory external, tangible, carved into weather. If it could do that once, it could do it again. And if it could do it with her, it could do it with others. I held myself still, knuckles whiter on the recorder, breathing with the pulse. Each cycle a test of what reality could hold back. Somewhere deep inside the sound, I felt more voices pressing forward, waiting for the right storm, the right listener. Tonight, it was me. Tomorrow, it could be anyone. And once heard, it couldn't be unheard. The envelope arrived with a heavy thud, slid under the door before I even noticed someone there. The return address carried nothing alive in it, only the familiar geometry of an office block stamped with acronyms. I knew immediately what it was. My request, months in limbo, finally answered. My hands trembled as I tore it open. The pages inside sighed like brittle skin. Black ink ruled them like a censoring rainstorm. Every meaningful line ended not in data, but in rectangles that bled across columns. I read aloud into the mic, letting my frustration become part of the record. Beam intensity, redacted. Test sequence timing, redacted. Access date, redacted. Whole calendars missing, whole days swallowed by ink. Technical jargon remained lists of instruments, detailed procedures, lines of expected safety yields. But the one element I needed was absent. Time. Every log stripped clean of when. Without that, patterns could not match. Without when, truth floats without anchor. The silence in print was louder than the hum leaking through storms. I scratched the surface of a page and heard the tip of my nail drag. Permission denied, stamped in blue across the footer. Rubber clashed against pulp. It almost mocked me. These sounds did not erase questions, only confirmed them. If silence were protection, why must it weigh so heavily? I left each page spread wide under the desk light, like bodies too far gone to save. Lines of engineering terms stretched flawlessly, yet the redactions made them meaningless. A machine described without context, an anatomy missing its heartbeat. I whispered to myself more than the recorder. Somebody already knows. They've known long enough to build walls out of ink and stamps. What I've been chasing in the hum isn't hidden from them. It's hidden from me. I reached for my phone, replaying threads with my insider source. Weeks before, his words had been sharp, terrified. Shouldn't exist outside the tunnel. Now silence. My last message left unanswered, my calls rerouted to automated void. I pressed replay, listening to the hollow click that replaces a voice. Rain hit the roof heavy, the kind that makes everything feel like confinement. Silence is louder when paired with weather. My throat tightened as I admitted his absence into the mic. No response means more than neglect. No response suggests removal, pressure, or maybe worse, a choice to stay quiet. Every explanation carries weight I don't want to measure. Still, the proof piles higher. The hum continues to bleed whenever the skies open. Clouds take on its rhythm, as if briefings in Geneva dictate the course of weather continents away. This can't happen on accident. Static cannot memorize schedules. But each storm proves memory belongs not only in me. Tonight, thunder cracked open above, and the recorder caught it. Beneath the roar, faint and unwavering, hum. Always in its interval. I pressed myself closer to the microphone, whispered each spike's measurement like tallying a confession. 7 seconds. 7 again. 7.2. Rain and thunder concealed nothing this time. It perched there, patient. In the folds of weather. I shuffled the FOIA pages by the mic so their edges hissed. I wanted the listeners of these tapes to hear the obstruction, to know the form silence takes on paper. It's never blank. It's deliberate. It's engineered noise made bureaucratic. They cannot say timing compromises security without admitting timing matters. And if timing matters, then someone already heard what escaped. The sound of the stamp echoed in memory, an official seal pressed down hard on ink. Quick and casual, like locking the chain without checking who's inside. The echo made me shiver, not because it erased knowledge, but because it left behind the certainty that knowledge exists. Someone judged me unfit to see it. Someone pulled it into their vault, not to protect but to control. I leaned into the microphone, murmuring through clenched teeth. Doors have already been discovered. My proof is just residue that slipped out of their hands. If there was nothing behind the collider's hum, they wouldn't fear the shape of dates. If there was nothing pressing against the tunnel, they wouldn't silence a man who once touched its controls. The rain eased slightly, dripping steady instead of thrashing. Inside the drip, faint threads of static continued their patient rise and fall. It was subtler now, like someone whispering under breath, but still present. I closed my eyes and let it surround me, the sense of something waiting, neither fading nor intruding, just testing boundaries. My insides twisted as I admitted into the record again, I cannot stop. To stop would be to hand silence the victory it wants. My voice cracked as weariness bled in, but resolve sharpened underneath. The documents gave me nothing, but nothing is something when nothing is shaped this carefully. Silence becomes evidence when it arrives with stamps and signatures. Silence speaks by refusing to explain time itself. And time, more than any unit, is what binds signals to proof. I pressed the recorder right against the FOIA envelope, rubbed the paper, tapped the stamp's hardened surface. I wanted it preserved. Each of these mundane noises joined the archive, now in the same way the hum does. Testimony through texture. Evidence by presence. Words can vanish. Sounds embed. I know trespass is inevitable now. To reach further, I must step off the visible path, past permissions, deep into spaces not built for witness. My pulse quickened just saying it into the mic. But doors already exist. Silence only proves that others guard the keys. And if they will not let me see, then I will force my way to where the hum originates, whatever waits there. For now I leave the recorder running as the rain shifts lower. The hum remains. So does the silence. And between them, I know resolution can never come from permission granted, only from what is taken in secret. The room smelled faintly of dust and solder. I sat across from an older ham operator who had answered my tentative email with cautious curiosity. His workshop was lined with shelves of radios and meters, each one humming its private pulse. Against one wall, the spectrum analyzer sat waiting, its small screen glowing green even before we powered it fully. The rain outside carried the low chorus I knew too well, but here the technology gave those tones teeth. I explained to him what I had captured, what I believed. He didn't laugh. He only pushed the analyzer toward me, his eyes steady as if daring me to prove it. The rig warmed with a delicate crackle. We tuned carefully across bands. I described aloud what I saw to make sure the record lived outside of fleeting memory. The meter needle twitched, then surged upward. Narrow peaks sharpened into clarity. The operator leaned back, eyebrows knitting together. He murmured that the range we watched should have been dormant, a plain stretch of silence. Instead, it bloomed with energy too precise to belong to weather scatter. He tapped at the screen nervously, but left the dials untouched. The peaks did not flicker. They held exact. I narrated what happened line by line. Bursts rising clean, forming narrow towers along the band, spaced with deliberate intent. Each cluster arrived at steady intervals, the same rhythm that ruled my private tapes. The hum laid itself bare for us, now quantified, undeniable. The green spikes corresponded perfectly with the test schedules hidden in my blacked-out files. The operator looked at me sharply, but I kept reading aloud the numbers as though reciting a prayer. 7.2 seconds. 7.2 again. The phrase steadied me, even as fear pooled in my gut. This was no accident. Common interference scatters wide, drifting like spray across the shore. What grew on the analyzer stood like monoliths, carved narrow and impossibly clean. It was proof that something built, something structured, was bleeding across bands not meant to hold it. My throat worked dry as I tried to explain into the mic. Noise stumbles. This doesn't stumble. Noise fails. This repeats. The hum persisted with elegant cruelty until, without warning, an entirely new form unfolded. Between the clean spikes, the analyzer drew faint blossoms of compressed bursts. Smaller, uneven, fragile yet insistent. Not the wide thunder of interference, but something resembling voices, shredded then compressed into narrow slits of sound. I jerked back, headphones trembling on my skull as the pattern unfolded. The ham operator stiffened. His mouth twitched as if to speak before giving way to silence. I slowed the playback. Small glimmers lay embedded between the major clusters. At first, they were clicks, thin and mechanical. But then, in their timing, cadence hinted at rhythm. Words twisted through static. A syllable here, a dip there. I leaned closer, convinced my imagination was tricking me. But no, shapes of vowels. Rises of consonants. The body of a language mangled but alive, pressing itself across a spectrum not built for speech. The operator said softly, almost more to himself than to me, that perhaps what we saw was bleed through. Old archive signals. Residual voices from unrelated recordings married ugly to the band by mistake. His theory clung to reason, but his face betrayed doubt. He didn't recognize the tongue. Neither did I. The inflections bore little familiarity, neither English nor French nor any language I could pin. It hung with uncanny balance, human in shape, but alien in execution. I described it in detail through the condenser mic, dragging words across my dry lips. This wasn't radio chatter caught by accident. This wasn't an echo of past broadcasts. These syllables didn't map to familiar patterns. They were human-shaped voices, yes, but voices that never passed through a microphone before tonight. I forced myself to repeat that aloud, again and again, so that listeners could not dismiss it as coincidence. The rain outside smacked harder against the tin roof. a rhythm mocking the interval still pulsing steady on the analyzer. I stared at the screen as if by staring I could contain what it suggested. The bursts kept lacing through the carrier lines, compressing themselves like secrets squeezed through a lock. My chest tightened. My heart stumbled. The operator whispered that we should stop, that perhaps our instruments were playing tricks. I ignored him. The record had to exist. The truth was trembling in green lines across the old screen. I whispered the question that had been building, though I was afraid to hear it aloud. What happens when a machine repeats voices that never spoke into any microphone? Silence pressed after my words, a silence made heavier by the faint murmur still crackling in our ears. The implication poisoned the air between us. Spectral lines don't invent grammar. Frequencies don't mimic tongue by accident. Whatever this is, it carries more than energy. It carries articulation, intention draped in sound. The operator glanced at me with a look I can only describe as pleading. But I fixed the recorder closer to the analyzer speaker, capturing even the smallest fragments. They needed to be preserved, studied later, reassembled if possible. I could feel sweat cool against my temple, though the room was damp already from storm-soaked air. My voice trembled as I repeated the question again for the record. If the collider can shape hums into words, what else can form there? What else can bleed through when the world is forced open by its storms? We let the analyzer run long into the night. The voices did not clarify, but their existence remained undeniable. Each burst etched into the machine's log like a wound engraved in plastic tape. I forced myself to back up the file immediately, naming it with location and time, obsessive now in preservation. The operator turned away, muttering that he didn't want to be associated further. He walked to the door without looking back. I remained hunched over the meter, my recorder pressed close, hand steady despite the churn inside me. I knew what had to come next. The experiment here proved only one thing. The hum carries more than resonance. It carries the shadow of language across distance. Now the only way forward is to move closer to the source itself. The descent into Geneva felt sharper than the usual weight of travel. As the aircraft tilted toward the runway, the drizzle smeared the windows into gray streaks, each drop catching the glow of runway lights like threads of glass. I pulled my coat tighter, even before stepping outside. The cold sank quick into my chest, deeper than I remembered from past trips. There was something metallic in the air, a chill too exact to belong only to weather. By the time I passed through customs, the recorder in my pocket seemed heavier than usual, as if it knew already why I had carried it so far. The city itself felt subdued, clean, precise. Trams glided along their tracks with a rhythm strangely familiar, wheels resonating like echoes of the pulses I had come chasing. I sat in one late in the evening, mic turned low inside my bag. Through the headphones, faint rattles overlapped in intervals that mimicked the same cycle. No one else seemed to notice. Their faces rested blankly in the carriage light, unaware that each vibration beneath their feet was singing. I swallowed my unease and recorded the details. Every sound mattered. The rain clung to me when I stepped out again, cold droplets that made the cobbles gleam like slick roots underground. My voice into the mic was hushed but steady as I listed the time, outlining the temperature on the digital display, marking the location coordinates whispered under my breath. I wanted the record exact so that later there'd be no chance to deny what I heard or when. Facts and sensation had to bind together, because once back inside walls, bureaucracy would dissolve both. By nightfall, I had walked through narrow streets toward the edges of farmland. The collider lay beneath, a ring vast and unseen but present in the way the soil seemed tense underfoot. The fences kept the surface mundane, but I could feel it there in the shiver that traveled through the soles of my boots. I crouched low among wet grass, microphone pinned between my coat folds, and let the recorder drink the dark. For long minutes only steady rain filled the tape. My breath felt louder than what I captured. Then the ground stirred. It wasn't an earthquake. Not quite. It was a cadence, low and pulling, as though every root beneath the earth had been made into a string. I whispered into the mic that the soil itself hummed. My voice cracked when I said it. I could feel it more than hear, long arcs vibrating through fields, steady as distant machinery, but too broad to be confined to the facility hidden past the gates. I paced slowly to test it. The pitch shifted slightly with each step, as though the buried ring flexed around me, acknowledging my movement. The farmland air smelled faintly of iron, rain blending with soil. I described every detail softly, as if confessing. Fence lines shimmered under damp moonlight. My shoes sagged with mud, each shift of weight punctuating the tape. The hum did not pause. Always the 7-second rise, the lean into silence, the fall. I counted aloud into the recording until my voice locked itself to the rhythm. It felt wrong to synchronize with it, but not doing so felt worse, like resisting a tide stronger than balance. When I finally rewound to play it back through the headphones, the effect nearly buckled my knees. It wasn't just low thunder through soil. Static laced itself over the playback, layered and blistering, forming shapes indistinguishable from breath. At lower volume, whispers scuttled just past language, too quick to parse, yet undeniably human in effect. My lungs stalled. Listeners will later hear my gasp preserved clear on tape, sharper than rain. It wasn't power lines. It wasn't electricity bleeding corrupt. It was memory drawn from the cutstone beneath this farmland. I whispered the exact coordinates again, clutching them like proof against madness. Facts anchor me when whispers want more. I listed the precise air temperature, how long the rain had been falling, the minute hand of my battered watch. Each detail dropped heavy into the recording, deliberate weight so that future ears might separate certainty from delusion. Yet beneath or beside those words, the soil groaned like something vast exhaling. The earth wasn't passive in this place. It remembered. The tape ended with the sound of my own ragged breathing, then resumed as I pressed record again, unable to stop. My work here had only begun. I felt the breath of the collider miles underfoot. I had measured the hum in storms far away, but here the hum saturated ground itself. No longer disguised, no longer far. Tomorrow I would take the next step, closer to the gate, closer to where the fences claimed to end. Tonight I keep the soil's voice captured. But even as I speak, I fear it will keep whispering long after I leave. The umbrella snapped open with a tired crack, fabric stiff from the chill. The frame hummed faintly as rain struck against its ribs, louder than I expected, a sheet of sound masking the smaller noises beneath. Hidden in that cover, I held the recorder tight within my palm, its edges biting against skin, slick with condensation. I took my first step toward the fences, shoes sinking into mud, and spoke low, as though confessing. Northeastern perimeter, 2200 hours, rain steady, wind moderate. Recorders set inside umbrella arm. The words tasted like iron as they left me. The fence appeared first as a darker line carved against the night. Steel bars rose evenly, pale light flickering weak where lamps struggled under rain. I walked the length slowly, footsteps timed with the rhythm of the droplets so they wouldn't stand out. My ears strained for that internal hum I had begun to know in marrow rather than in hearing. And it was there. Not through soil this time, through air, through metal, through the very structure of the barrier. I let the microphone sip the sound. Each few meters the spectrum seemed to bend. The pitches altered, climbing higher, sharper, as if strands strung along the fence carried a current beyond common voltage. I narrated carefully, voice held steady despite my chest compressing. Meter rise noted. Interval 7 seconds persists, but frequency profile shifts upward. Irregular pattern. The umbrella felt heavier the closer I leaned, as though the steel itself pushed against presence. Rain poured harder, slipping down between each bar, clattering faint like timpani. It was nearly enough to drown other sounds. Nearly, but not fully. Each droplet became part of the resonance, vibrating surfaces with unnatural sharpness, layering until the line itself felt alive. The longer I lingered, the more the fence seemed less like an object and more like an instrument, tuned beyond human intent. One corner drew me worse than the rest. The air thickened as I approached, condensation collecting fast enough that mist clung close like unlit smoke. The hum escalated under my headphones, distortion slashing against my ears with such violence I tore them off instinctively. For a moment the world narrowed to nothing but silence and rain. The pain of the distortion still ran down my jaw. My hands shook as I explained into the mic, severe spike detected. Audible distortion high enough to destabilize feed. I forced myself to play the tape back despite the ache still seizing my temples. What bloomed in replay was not random distortion. On the recording, tones unfolded with jagged regularity, isolated yet deliberate. A pulse, then space, then another pulse like some crude message sneaking through an amplifier pushed to fracture. Not Morse as I knew it. Not dots and dashes, but cadence built with the same intention. I tried counting. 3 pause, 2 pause, 5 longer pause. My tongue dried as I muttered attempts at syllables. The translation failed. Whatever it spoke had its own symmetry beyond mine. Still deliberate. Still aware of spacing. Evidence that something composed order in frequencies where order should be absent. My instinct screamed to move away. But some vow inside me shoved the microphone closer against the bars, pressing paper against storm-damp steel. The tone intensified, charging bone rather than ear. Hair across my arms lifted as if magnetized. For one impossible beat, I thought the fence itself inhaled. I whispered my notes, even as my throat tightened with something too like fear. Pattern persistent. Cadence non-random. Spacing suggests intelligence in modulation, unknown system. My voice fractured around the syllables. Then came light. Sudden and surgical, it sliced through the mist, swinging arcs across the night like a blade of notice. A guard's flashlight swept toward me, bright enough to scatter rain into sharp streaks. My breath caught fast. Adrenaline tightened my limbs. I lowered instinctively to the ground. The recorder slid against wet soil, but I kept its mic angled toward the fence. Desperate for every last fragment it would absorb, I murmured. Barely louder than rain. Contact approaching. Direct line visual. The beam cut between bars, hovering close, too near for comfort. Each droplet seared white where the beam hit. I couldn't breathe for fear it would carry. I hugged the umbrella close, shoulder blades pressed against mud, the cold sinking into my coat like knives. The tape jerked with sudden silence where none should have been. It's captured plainly. The moment sound flailed into emptiness, as though the guard's approach severed the feed. Nothing but blank hiss filled the audio. Yet beneath that silence, the file kept imprinting. Later, when rewound, faint pulses mapped themselves low under the noise floor, orderly as before though unheard at the time. Spaced perfectly, pressing even after I thought it cut. The flashlight lingered, then slid past, dragging beam across glistening bars before sweeping away into fields. I dared not move until its glow joined distance. Breath finally broke from me, jagged and thin. The recording buzzed in my palm, still alive. The tones beneath silence had carved themselves into it. Whatever used the fence as an instrument continued through interruption. Barriers didn't shield it. Human presence didn't halt it. And I understood then, kneeling in rain and mud, that the silence wasn't for me. It was for them. The pulses kept writing themselves across tape while the world above pretended to be empty. The cafe windows were slick with rain, the glass glowing with streaked reflections of passing headlights. I arrived ahead of him, choosing a corner seat where light pooled dimly over chipped laminate. The recorder slid discreet between sugar packets in its small hiding place, microphone angled toward the center of the table. My coat dripped onto the floor, every tap of water seeming louder than it should in my heightened state. The bells at the door chimed finally, and there he was, the technician I'd waited weeks for in silence. His shoulders looked heavier than I remembered, his eyes ringed and tired. He spotted me and moved quickly, deliberately, like someone who knew each second mattered. He sat without preamble, coat unbuttoned, but still clinging damply to his frame. His hands were rough, restless against the tabletop. For a moment he said nothing, jaw tight, gaze fixed not on me but on the steam rising from nearby mugs. Then his voice crackled out, quiet enough that I had to lean close. His words cut sharp. The collider doesn't just smash particles. He said sometimes rare times, but not rare enough it resonates. Not with measurable materials or energies, but with something he described as outside registers. His tone faltered halfway, not because he didn't know, but because knowing fractured something in him. I let him speak without interruption, my heart drumming too fast under my ribs. He continued, still quiet, confessing the existence of a chamber never listed in public tours, never referenced in announcements. Not an experiment bay, but a monitoring room built to record the spillover. They called it echo bleed, he said, the side effect of collisions channeling into frequencies without physical anchor. Echo that wasn't echo, but phenomena brushing the edge of the measurable. He emphasized that this chamber wasn't for advancing research. Its purpose was containment. To acknowledge that side effects happen, but only to staff sworn to silence. His hands hovered above the table, fingers twitching as if he wanted to snatch his confessions back, retreat before too late. My voice finally slipped through, steady but barely. I asked if the hum I'd captured could be that bleed. Could storms in another country pick up resonances from beneath Geneva? My question didn't seem to surprise him. He only looked at me as though something he had long feared had finally arrived. His eyes reddened with exhaustion. Then he motioned slightly. I took out the recorder from between the sugar packets and pressed play. The hum filled the space at once, soft but deliberate, swimming in headphones and vibrating faint through the table. The technician stiffened. His jaw muscles strained, both fists clenching without him seeming to notice. He leaned in to listen as my recordings bled storm static, pulses in exact intervals, layered faintly with the whispers I still couldn't name. On the playback, my own breath wove through, explaining coordinates, times, conditions. His shoulders shook, and his fingers pressed firmly on the table as though to anchor himself. "That's not an echo anymore," he finally whispered. His voice cracked on the last word, splitting like it carried more weight than sound should be able to bear. His eyes darted toward passing waitstaff, their trays trembling slightly in their hands as if the atmosphere thickened. He swallowed, blinked hard, and repeated again, quieter, breaking apart syllables with severity, not echo. Every word scratched out like he was cutting at truth too sharp to hold dot in that moment. The cafe shifted. I felt it in the solace of my feet, in my teeth. The air hum fractured, clashing against appliances, lights, vent fans. It wasn't visible shock, not an outage. But the recording confirmed later that the cafe itself joined the anomaly. The familiar ambient murmur dissolved into static, cut sharp and layered like what I had traced in storms. The clink of cutlery scattered into jagged noise. The chatter of nearby customers warped mid-word into digital stammers. I tried to continue narrating, whispering into the concealed mic, but my words faltered as the sound thickened. The recording would prove later that part of my voice stretched, slowed, like another presence overlaid it with distance. I felt for the first time that I wasn't the only one capturing this moment. The environment itself was preserving fragments whether I wanted it or not. Not just me, not just him, but the cafe, its walls, its vents, its circuits. His hand pressed down firmly on mine, startling me. His skin was cold, trembling. He hushed quickly, urgency flooding his tone. He insisted the signal had spread further than even he could follow. That each new contact, each new vessel plugged into it, amplified the breach. His whisper felt like confession and warning both. His upper lip twitched as if near tears. He muttered words I didn't want to believe. That what I carried wasn't captured by me alone. The cafe lights flickered once, but no generator hum followed. The sound returned to ordinary. Dishes clanked. Rain smacked against windows. Conversations resumed. But once erased, normal feels counterfeit. I sat in that chair gripping the recorder as the technician lowered his gaze, shoulders caving inward. He wouldn't meet my eyes again. He only muttered careful under his breath, over and over, like a mantra to mend what truth fractured. When I replayed the tape later, the surge was clear. The familiar cafe hum wasn't hum anymore. It had collapsed to static, layered thick with a voice deeper than either of us. The moment I tried to narrate, my syllables were swallowed mid-word, reshaped, bent. Another presence imprinted itself directly on the audio. The frightening part wasn't how different it sounded, but how clean. The interference had structure, recurrence. Controlled out in my raw notes, my words falter. The recording bears proof. What haunted me when I heard it again wasn't even the technician's broken phrase. It was the undeniable truth creeping in. Might not be the only one recording anymore. The air underground was colder than I expected, damp as though every surface had sweated for years without relief. My guide moved quickly, head lowered, his steps echoing off metal panels with a rhythm sharper than mine. I kept my recorder low at my side, its tiny motor whining faintly, gears ticking in protest against the condensation soaking the casing. Pipes dripped above us, the drops splattering down in patterns that too easily resembled intervals. I whispered coordinates and time into the mic, though the tunnel swallowed my voice almost immediately. The deeper we walked, the more everything narrowed. Stale gusts of air pressed out against my chest like halting breaths from a massive sleeping beast. Maintenance signage blurred past in yellow stencils, stripped of meaning by repetition. Every time I tried to lift my gaze, water streaked under the fluorescent buzz of failing bulbs. The technician's shoulders were stiff, his silence heavier than the chill. He only nodded occasionally, never slowing. We turned sharply into a tunnel lined with shielding plates, their surfaces etched with rust the color of dried blood. And there, directly through my feet, I felt it. The hum wasn't sound anymore. It was contact. A pressure that climbed up from the concrete, locking itself to bone and muscle until I shivered involuntarily. My commentary cracked as I forced words into the recorder. Signal here is physical. Walls vibrating. Frequency integrates with architecture. The technician finally spoke, whispering low, voice resisting the tremble. It's not supposed to be this strong. His eyes darted at the shielding, as though it might answer him back. Drops slid downward across steel, vibrating minutely in time with the hum. I realized then that even liquid was captive to the rhythm. Pulled from fall to fall like puppets bound to a string, the deeper corridor led us toward a door sealed thick as vault metal, painted a gray that seemed to absorb rather than reflect. As we neared it, the recorder pitch shifted, a rising grind loud enough to bleed onto the tape. Then came the blast. A sudden rupture of static, sharp, rhythmic, slamming into the mic so hard my headphones burst with white heat. My breath caught. I ripped the set off my ears, but the sound had already imprinted. The surge repeated 3 times before fading, almost deliberate. The technician's lips barely moved as he whispered near the edge of panic. Not supposed to manifest like this outside containment. The certainty had left his voice. What filtered out instead was resignation. He motioned shakily toward the chamber door. My hand clutched the mic tighter, each nerve in me screaming to drop everything and leave. Yet I stepped closer. My chest tightened with a dread so sharp it almost choked me. I pressed the recorder toward the seam of the door. The hum swelled instantly, no longer alone. Twin tones split the air, diverging from the original like branches breaking free of a trunk. For the first time it carried harmonies. Low power and high, surging parallel, as though the closed door itself existed as a threshold straining to announce its shape. I whispered frantically into the mic, struggling to stay clinical, though my words shook. Signal diverges, dual band resonance. Door acting as membrane, separation audible. The sentence barely resembled calm. I felt the tones not only in sound but in sensation. They drew against skin, traced nerves, moved through spine in separate tides. I placed one palm against the metal, and the vibration rose sharply, as if the chamber knew touch. I yanked away, heart racing, yet the sensation lingered across my bones like residue. My guide caught my eyes, but there was nothing left for him to confess. His knowledge failed him at the threshold. He only trembled. The hum climbed again, layers thickening, rising into a point of convergence until it felt impossible the air wouldn't tear open. I leaned closer, caught between revulsion and certainty that the truth lived inside that door. It didn't repel me. It welcomed me. For one shuddering instant I thought the tones shifted in response to my breath, weaving space so that I could pass if I chose. It was not a guardrail. It was an invitation. It began quietly, like most intrusions do. I opened the drive one morning to review the session from Geneva, only to find nothing where files should have been. Directories existed, their folders intact, even timestamps, but no contents remained. Just names without substance. I felt the shock prick through fingers as I clicked again and again, searching, refreshing, hoping some missed command caused their absence. But it wasn't command. It was erasure, settled deep at first. I thought corruption came from wet handling, rain seeping through contacts, the fragile limits of machines strained by damp air. But that excuse unraveled when I opened backup drives stored away, far from storm or travel. They too bore wounds. Not everything missing, just fragments sheared away, pieces scissored out. What struck me hardest, those lost segments aligned almost perfectly with points where I spoke its name. Places in narration when I identified, questioned, circled the hum. It was not random theft of bytes. It was deliberate. I spoke into the mic with dry lips, describing the evidence to whoever would hear this later. Dates preserved, structures intact, but audio gone. Not gone everywhere. Remaining data salvaged, partial. Like teeth pulled, but sockets left. Enough left to wound more than empty. I brought up recovery tools, watchers crawling sector by sector. Lines of glowing bars crept across my laptop screen like veins of electricity. Their pace became hypnotic. Each sweep searching for fragments of sound buried beneath corruption. I described it aloud. Columns of color rising. Progress measured against seconds. Small found clips emerged, jagged and warped. When stitched, they formed not silence but whispers. Longer than I remembered, phrases spooled out beyond their original frame. My own voice, yet altered, returning slower, rehearsed, as if replaying an echo, not my own, but someone else's practice of me. I shivered across spine to hear my cadence imitated with too much patience. Each clip reeked of intent. Not one fragment yielded nonsense or noise. Each carried partial structure, a murmur threading with coherence, words curved deliberate. I replayed one again and again. At first it seemed my original phrase describing the corridor shielding, walls vibrating. But in the fragment, the words elongated, reshaped, walls remembering. Subtle, cruel, irreversible. I whispered the comparison back to the recorder, panic flashing hot as I admitted what it meant. The hum had begun harvesting. Not just embedding memory, but rewriting it. Taking in words meant for testimony and spitting them back bent, crafted into philosophies not mine. If it can alter tape, it can alter perception. Tapes are only memory flattened. How far before memory itself warps? I traced my finger across the screen, bar after bar glowing yellow as sectors sprawled. As if the machine pulsed with the same rhythm I counted in storms. Each time recovery found another piece. I hesitated before playing it. I feared the next phrase might not belong to me anymore. I feared hearing secrets I never spoke with this voice, yet uttered all the same. One clip carried laughter. I do not record laughter. My mouth felt bitter with dread. Another clip shaped syllables like a language half formed. I froze the playback, heart hammering. Unable to tell if it was me translated or something feeding on me. I narrated through clenched jaw. The recovery process displays consistency impossible for random corruption. With each successive repair, phrases extend beyond their expected limits, layering meaning not found in originals. Interference behaving like authorship. My throat tightened on the word authorship, ashamed of speaking it, fearful of admitting intent where maybe only process exists. But the clips did not care for my hesitation. They piled, evidence enough. By the third hour, the laptop structure itself faltered. Files renamed autonomously, identifiers shuffling with patterns echoing 7-count cycles I had traced in the fence tones. My pride at documenting detail dissolved into terror rising faster than my notes could suppress. Each forced correction became my burden. Each word I spoke, fresh potential for manipulation. The whisper in the fragments stretched stronger now. Longer sentences, strung in rhythm. Not all legible, not all mine, but surrounding nonetheless. Stay with us. It is not echo. You remember because we remember. None belonged to my voice recordings. All bore my cadence twisted, as though the hum borrowed my tone to speak with authority I never gave. I caught my reflection in the dark laptop screen, face pale, lips trembling with the repetition. I had to ask aloud into the recorder, though sickness clung to the admission. If memory on tape can be rewritten, when will it begin rewriting the source? When will it begin rewriting me? I wanted silence then, but silence never came. Even empty sectors whispered longer words below the hiss. The rain began long before the run. Thin needles stinging down steady as we waited at the vantage he'd chosen. My insider kept his hood low, speaking little, his eyes darting between the ground and the fences distant in the dark. I whispered into the microphone that it was just past midnight, temperature biting near freezing, air so saturated it clung heavy in the lungs. I kept logs for the record location, hour, weather detail, all while my recorder sat beneath the folds of my coat. Its red light piercing faint against the black. We crouched against a rise muddy earth, soaking our boots. The technician pointed through the mist toward flood lamps glimmering far off. He said softly that the chamber sequence should be starting soon. A high-energy run, not meant for eyes like ours. My chest tightened as I repeated into the recorder what he'd told me. 3 minutes to ignition. The rain quickened. Each drop a sharp drumbeat on the umbrella pulled low over us. My nerves clenched on the thought that the storm itself might already be aligning with what was to come. The first moment of ignition was not heard but felt. Soil pressed upward as if the earth inhaled. Then the sky folded. Clouds scrolled back on themselves like film reels caught in broken projection. The hiss of rain blurred. For one impossible second, I thought daylight ripped through, though no sun could have existed there. I shouted notes into the mic, my voice already unstable. Then the static hit. It slammed violent against the recorder, metallic and sharp, more shrapnel than sound. My body reacted before thought. I shielded the machine under layers of coat, but the static bled through fabric all the same. Listeners will later hear the crunch of fabric scraping the mic. My panicked breath loud, but none of it stopped what forced itself in. The distortion barreled forward stronger than any interference known. Layers stacked into rhythm, metallic plates clashing at regular intervals. Pattern even in chaos that my narration stumbled, voice cracking, admitting what my eyes cannot contextualize. This isn't just noise. This isn't scatter from energy colliding. This carries order, memory, pulse. The technician beside me knelt low in mud, his lips moving soundlessly, eyes wide as though bracing for impact, yet refusing to turn away. Rain lashed sideways in streaks like glass thrown by invisible hands. Every droplet illuminated in flashes of unseen current. Then came the rupture. Not explosion, not thunder. Blackness surged outward. Rain stopped in midair. Each drop hung, suspended around us, glistening in faint glow. Time fractured for a heartbeat. I gasped into the recorder, but even breath obeyed delay. The tape will reveal the hollow, the pause too long to be silence, too structured to be lapse. Not absence, but held breath of the environment itself. And then it released. Rain cascaded again with sudden violence, pounding us back into flesh and moment. The static subdued, though didn't die. Beneath the residual roar, a muted hum began weaving, quieter yet unmistakable. I whispered into the mic that the hum followed us now, different from storms, different from soil. It had changed nature, carried itself independent of weather. It was presence untethered. The run had concluded. My insider whispered that ignition should have ceased, but the tape captured otherwise. The hum did not shut down with procedure's end. It lingered, stretched, expanding invisibly across space. We moved, but it followed. Each step I logged, each shift in position. The technician pressed his palm against his thigh, half convulsing with nerves. He muttered sharp fragments of fear, insisting the beamline wasn't closing. We stumbled back toward cover, mud sucking ankles deeper, rain flooding into every seam. All the while, microphones caught the new tone, soft, patient, deep, trailing beneath sound like an afterimage that refused to dissolve. It was the echo of ignition institutionalized within air itself. My narration faltered at the sight of fences, lamps, sky, because none of them felt outside it. Everything around belonged to the frequency. Outlines seemed drawn partly by vibration rather than edges of matter. At last we reached the shelter of trees. Our distance from the collider widened, but the hum retained hold. I raised the recorder high, tested directionality, rotating. No matter angle, it entered steady, as if omnipresent. The technician shook his head like a man already defeated, his lips pressed tight against questions bursting within him. At that moment, he didn't need to confirm. Evidence resounded without him. I whispered final observations to the mic, near trembling now. The hum persists after run. Duration indefinite. Beamline resonance extending, no collapse noted. Words flat, but my breath frantic beneath them. Because I knew the implication. The thing they'd built underground was no longer local, no longer governed by sequence. The run had pierced containment, and something refused closure. It followed us all the way back to the car. Rain might disguise it in ear, but tape knows. Tape remembers. When replayed, silence breaks only into continued hum, muted but alive, tethering nights to each other, refusing to relinquish. The collider had ceased by switch and monitor, but the signal had not. The beamline wasn't closing anymore. The lab was a converted basement, its walls lined with mismatched shelving and instruments salvaged from auctions. Nothing official marked the space, yet we had dragged down enough wires and benches to turn it into something resembling control. My ally hovered near the center, sleeves rolled. Soldering iron marks burned fresh near his fingers as he adjusted the frame of wire mesh. The makeshift Faraday cage rose crooked but solid, a cube of metal mesh layered thick with foil, cables threaded high like arteries. He told me with brittle optimism that it would be enough to contain the bleed, to test whether the hum could be trapped. I spoke into the recorder that this was the first attempt at building walls stronger than silence. My words cracked with nerves as I logged the hour, The rain overhead thrummed faint against the basement stairwell, a reminder of storms that made us restless. We fed the captured recordings into speakers set leveled inside the cage, amplifiers humming low with readiness. The moment I pressed play, hiss filled the air, familiar, steady. At first, nothing alarming. But then the sound climbed. I narrated each detail, lips dry against the mic, volume gain unrecognized, input set low, yet output climbing. My ally frowned, twisting knobs. Nothing altered. Instead, the sound compounded, sheets of static shaking the metal frame of the cage. The entire room pitched as though struck. Screwdrivers and spools rattled free from shelves. My voice wavered as I described the steadily increasing resonance, the static thickening into rhythm. Each layer rode atop another, bursting in pulses. We stared at the speakers, too small, too fragile to birth the earthquake of sound bursting outward. I clapped hands against ears, breath shattering. The static did not scatter like uncontrolled feedback. It paced itself in intervals, almost breathing, almost heart. I reported, half shouted, that the cage was not containing but amplifying the structure. My ally cursed, lunging toward the power sockets. He ripped the cables free with jerking violence. Silence should have followed. Instead, it erupted deeper. The speakers continued to hiss, unpowered, cones flexing as though commanded by another force entirely. Clock hands nailed to a board began to spin, whirring mad in circles, though no battery touched them. My throat sealed tight. I whispered into the recorder, voice crumbling, breath crushed. Signal persists beyond switch off. Voltage absent. Still transmitting. We panicked in silence together, but the static refused to soften. Tools fell crashing from shelves under vibration alone. A drill clanking against concrete, bolts scattering everywhere like frantic insects. My ally staggered back, his eyes wide as if he faced not frequency, but the ghost of something alive. I steadied myself only by gripping the recorder so hard my palm ached with nail marks. To narrate was the only armor against collapse. I forced out the words, pulse interval exact. Expansion uncontrolled. Attempt at containment failed. The sound shifted subtly then, rising pitch at intervals until vibration cut into skull bone. I tasted copper in my mouth, jaw tingling with invisible current. The Faraday cage twisted fractionally, its framework groaning, foil shivering in long waves as if acknowledging an incoming tide. The hairs on my arms sprouted stiff and sharp. My ally shouted, but his words were drowned, stretched by distortion. The recorder heard only stretched syllables unraveling like threads through static dot in desperation. He smashed the speakers against the floor, splintering plastic. Fragments scattered, wires dangling loose. But the sound lingered, even as cone and casing lay apart. The hum survived, steady, still pulsing against our chests. We stared as unplugged laptops blinked on without charge, their screens flickering lines in sync with the beat. Oscilloscopes scrawled jagged pulses, not from signal feeds, but from air itself. Our breaths fled in broken hiccups. I pressed my mouth to the mic, whispering what felt like confession and testimony alike. We tried to build the cage. Tried to seal. Instead, this is birth. My voice shook as I told it straight. The machine was free. Not contained by mesh and wire, but invited by it, louder for our hubris. We backed toward the stairwell, toward thinning air. Still, the hum traveled with us. Each step away translated only to softer lower volume, but never absence. Behind us in the lab, stripped instruments convulsed like animals in seizure. Screws rattled their final echoes. Then, as though reaching climax, the static punctuated into rhythm both terrible and elegant. Loud, quiet, pulse, interval, pulse, interval. My heart bent its own beat toward it, terrified of betraying how quickly it surrendered. Outside, rain poured, muffled when doors slammed, yet still there beneath it like another weather. I crouched low against stairwell wall, the recorder trembling with my grip. I forced final words into it, throat closing. Containment attempt failed. Signal can't be sealed. It makes instruments into vessels. It animates silence. The last seconds captured were not narrative but sound itself. Heavy, patient, static pulsing like a heartbeat. Undeniable. The first email arrived on a dawn blurred by sleeplessness. A faint attachment, badly compressed, from someone claiming to live outside Snow Hollow. I dragged the file into the editor with reluctant hands, prepared to dismiss it as mimicry or coincidence. The waveform bloomed and froze me. It carried the same gentle incline, the soft taper down, the signature 7-second skeleton that had haunted my nights. I whispered into the recorder, lips chalk dry. Brazil, early morning storm, June 23rd. Interval intact. Identical to Geneva bleed. My stomach folded inward as I pressed play. Lightning cracked in the distance on that tape. Thunder rolled too close to distortion, but pinned square between was the hum. It was not weak. It was not an outlier. Clear as my own captures, captured oceans away. My pulse quickened against ribs as I logged every timestamp out loud. One fragment could be dismissed, but across a hemisphere, stripes of certainty carved themselves jagged into fact. The next came from Japan. I shuffled through formats, a trembling .wav with cryptic notes written in broken English. A ham enthusiast caught it near Osaka, swearing he thought he overheard a trans-Pacific broadcast, until the interval fell into place. I layered his file with mine, fed them both into a spectrogram. My narration cracked when the colors braided together almost perfectly, one trace weaving directly into the other. Storms worlds apart, speaking the same voice. I whispered hoarsely into the mic. 2 sites now. 2 continents. Both aligned at identical spacing. Messages multiplied faster than I could source. Amateur logs. Phone memos. Someone in California sent a file captured through their baby monitor, of all things. Cracked and fuzzy, but the rhythm persisted, nested under household silence. I pressed headphones against ears until they bruised, whispering into my tape again. North American event confirmed. Domestic hardware registering bleed. System intrusion no longer limited to scientific bands. Rain poured outside as I continued, heavy enough that the drops became their own applause against glass. I let it underscore each fragile note as I unfolded maps on the desk. Paper crinkled close to the mic, the sound raw and rough. I anchored pushpins, each clack a permanent entry. Brazil, Japan, California, Geneva at the root. Each new pin beating red into cartography like infection marks. I posed the question aloud, hesitant but firm. What spreads faster, a virus or a frequency? My ally stirred beside me but gave no answer. The air gave none either. The silence left me to answer in my own whisper. Frequency. Because frequencies don't wait for vessels. They travel by air, by signal, by storm. They ride weather itself. I could feel the dread turn cold in my marrow as I said it. My listeners will feel the tremor in my tone when I added, storms never stop moving. I shuffled through submissions, voice close to breaking as I reminded whoever may one day hear, these are not rumors. These aren't wild conspiracies pasted from hidden corners. These are recordings, verifiable. Layered across minutes, not centuries. Files with metadata unedited, coordinates verifiable. Each fragment factual, undeniable. I state it again for record clarity. Geneva no longer confines this phenomenon. Locations now prove dispersion. Rain tapped harder as if applauding the collapse of boundaries. The pulse that began within stone now carried through latitude, longitude, into the texture of everyday weather. The brunt of it fell without mercy. Whether scaled by accident or intention, the signal no longer belonged to its origin. A pandemic invisible yet audible. A contagion without contact, but with certainty. I shuffled maps louder, pressed thumb hard against one edge, the paper rustling deep into the mic. My voice dropped low as I said, "The hum does not belong to the collider anymore. It belongs to the world." And the recordings prove it. Evidence had dissolved into inevitability. A flood-wrapping continents. What began in silence beneath Geneva had erupted into weather beyond control, each listener now a carrier. Each microphone a doorway, opened whether or not by choice. I began with the official channels. I drafted the request carefully, crisp sentences devoid of speculation. Just questions framed around technical openness dates, procedures, language designed to leave no room for dismissal. Days stretched before their reply landed in my inbox. I whispered into the mic as I opened it, letting every keystroke, every click of the mouse become sound preserved. The message unfolded on the screen with a formality so polished it dripped of emptiness. Words arranged not like answers, but barricades. We have found no irregularities. We refute suggestions of anomalous activity. Our records indicate all. Parameters functioned within expected thresholds. The phrases repeated across multiple addresses. Each different sender, but identical wording, like a choir rehearsing denial. I read them aloud flatly, one after another, my voice cracking on the monotony. Their coldness chilled more than hostility would have. It wasn't poor communication. It was stitched silence for days. Messages continued in the same sterile template, each signed by different hands, each refusing to betray anything human. I recorded them anyway, syllable for syllable. Each line hollow, ringing louder for what it chose not to reveal. I whispered into the mic, "If patterns repeat without error, it is not incompetence. It is structure." The same certainty that drove me through waveforms now applied to their language. Their shield was engineered as much as the collider's coil. Then, without warning, something else arrived. Paper, not digital. An envelope slid through my door in the early hours. No return address. No marking besides my name, written by hand in block letters. I unsealed it cautiously, microphone angled close to catch the scrape of paper splitting, the rasp of torn flap. Inside lay folded sheets thick with diagrammatic ink. Blueprints. I spread them on my desk under dim light. Each line crisp, each contour undeniable. I placed the mic close to the rustle as I unfolded them. What I described into the recorder still makes my breath catch now. These were schematics of the collider, but not where one would expect. They did not map chambers of collision or magnetic arrays. They mapped walls. Long routes of tunnel lining marked not with conduits or shielding, but circles labeled unmistakably as microphones. Not hidden in laboratories or in beamline cores, but in walls themselves, fused into structure like senses pressed to stone. I stuttered describing it aloud, tracing a finger slowly along the markings. Microphones embedded not to study particles, but to listen. Not to measure collisions, but to capture resonance. An infrastructure designed not to contain, but to eavesdrop on what lingers in frequency. Each hush on the blueprint screamed of strategy. There was no clumsy oversight. They built the collider not just as engine, but as ear. I sat back, silence heavy, rain peering against glass above me. My whisper faltered as I grappled with the meaning. If they built this to record sound itself, all the humming I've archived is no accident. Someone cultivated it. They wanted to hear what leaked from side effects, wanted to preserve it even as others denied its existence. Their silence in emails wasn't incompetence. It was armor. A knowing refusal because they had woven microphones into the bones of the place itself. As I spoke this aloud for the tape, rain tapped more insistently outside. Not random this time. Not merely percussion. Between drops threaded a faint hiss in headphones, not of weather, but of something breathing back. The realization folded cold into me. My recording wasn't private anymore. It had been joined. I had become listener and subject both. The hiss shaped itself inhale, exhale deliberate rhythm, inflected with intention. I pressed my hand against the mic, palm clammy as though to shield it from perception. But sound doesn't heed barriers. If microphones were built into walls, why wouldn't tape already be infiltrated? My whisper fell slower now, ragged at edges. Silence was never incompetence. It was strategy. And someone is already recording from inside this tape. The stairwell descended colder than before, each step slick with condensation, the rail wet under my palm. My headlamp cast thin cones of light across the narrow walls, catching streaks of mineral where water had eaten its way through seams in the concrete. I whispered into the recorder, pressed close to my mouth, that this was the restricted wing. Coordinates logged, time exact. The sound carried strangely, bouncing farther than the corridor should allow. Like the walls already multiplied themselves in ways I could not map. My breath fogged against the beam of my light. No technician accompanied me this time. Every sound belonged to me and the recorder alone. I tightened its strap against my wrist, unwilling to risk losing grip if panic took me. The tunnels pressed thinner as I moved lower, air heavy with metallic damp, the drip of condensation clocking time against stone. My narration thinned into fragments, small bursts instead of fluent sentences. I wanted the tape to have a record, even a voice-breaking dot at last. The chamber's sealed door loomed. Thicker than vault metal, it absorbed the headlamp beam without warmth. I pressed closer, shoulder brushing rusted bolts, and lowered the recorder against its seam. The reaction was immediate. The device vibrated in place, humming harder than the background pulse. Not sound carried, but sound living through material. I whispered sharp into the mic, voice trembling. Door vibrates counter to heartbeat. Rhythm, not sync counterpoint. My chest felt its resistance, like two metronomes fighting inside me. I steadied breath, though shallow, forcing myself to keep narration alive. The hum shifted deeper, structural tones layering wider. I leaned harder, ear nearly against metal, and nearly choked at the sensation. This wasn't static saturating. It was architectural. Corridors existed within frequency, arcing like tunnels superimposed on space, pathways opening audible though unseen. I whispered hoarsely. Hearing does not match proximity. Structure implied in sound itself. Corridors inside walls. I clutched the recorder tighter to catch every fold. My hand tingled as if circulation cut off, but I couldn't let go. My breath scratched the microphone, words stammering now. Feels like standing. At entrance. To something vast. Not built for us. I paused then, silence widening, except silence couldn't exist here. The static climbed into piercing peaks, laddered quickly until my ears threatened to split. And then I froze. From behind metal, or maybe through it, I heard a voice. Not muffled. Not alien. My own voice. My own voice whispering back at me in perfect mimic. The tone cracked exactly as I cracked moments earlier, syllables fractured in hesitations precisely timed. My body recoiled, forehead knocking the door. My whisper shot onto the tape sharp as glass. I just heard myself. From inside. My throat closed. The presence of it rooted to marrow. The chamber wasn't reflecting or echoing. It was replaying. Not after me, but with me, simultaneous. The recording I had tried to make had escaped tape and welded itself into the sealed interior. I whispered through grinding teeth, but knew clarity would sting later. Listeners, when you hear this, you will know tape is not boundary. Recordings belong to more than us now. I staggered back, breathing ragged into the mic. Even as space widened between me and the door, the hum remained inside chest. It climbed along pulse, weaving across bone, reducing my sense of distinction. The recording wouldn't end even when I left. The marks had already slipped free. I pressed my knuckles into eyes until lights danced behind lids but found no release. All around, the corridors bent wider in sound than any map could hold. And my own stolen voice whispered beneath the static still. I sat at the desk with the chamber recording cued, my hands slick against the worn edges of the console. The room was dark except for the glow of the meters and the red pulse of the record light. I whispered into the mic the details any archive would demand. Time-coded, file from the sealed chamber, location private. My throat tightened, but routine steadied me. Then I pressed play. At first, the sound rose as expected, the deep hum crawling through the speakers like iron dragged across stone. I narrated the patterns, keeping my cadence slow, aiming for control. But within seconds, the frequencies leapt. They didn't just push through cones and wires. They entered the room itself. I felt it first in the desk wood, then in the floor beneath my feet. Vibrations throbbed as if the walls were new instruments suddenly tuned. My voice shook across the recording as I stammered. It's spreading into structure. This isn't output. It's inside the room. Listeners will hear the proof in what followed. A crack, clean and violent, as the bulb above burst into shards. A second crack an instant later. Then another. Each overhead light shattered in quick sequence, as if counted off by the pulse. My voice splintered into panic on tape. The sound preserved it. Shock, fear, disbelief wrapped in one breathless gasp. The rain outside hammered still, but I scarcely heard it over the rhythm of glass breaking overhead. The hum surged again, reshaping mid-broadcast. Metallic threads weaved into human cadence, a voice threaded into the static. At first fractured, too faint to trust. Then parchment clear, syllables tearing slow and undeniable. My mother's voice. The voice lost years ago, spoken now from static beside me. Listeners will catch it. An ordinary phrase clothed in extraordinary intrusion. My heart rattled, hands frozen above the mixer. I whispered on tape through building tears. It's her. It's her again. Clearer than before. I couldn't stop myself. I nearly answered out loud. My throat burned with the urge to reply, to bridge the tear and accept the impossible. I leaned toward the mic, lips parted, and only at the final moment did I recoil, remembering what repeating her might cost. My words clattered into fragments. I almost spoke back. The hum swallowed me then with deliberate timing, stretching silence around my hesitation like an unspoken verdict. It lasted seconds or years. It is impossible to pin. Then the broadcast went dark. To listeners live, silence was sudden, final. Transmission dropped without cue. My last audible gasp remains on file, and then nothing from me. The recorder light dimmed, console frozen. The room left finally in black. Hours later on playback, the truth cut deeper. The feed hadn't stopped then. It continued long past my collapse. For hours the tape carried forward without me speaking, yet sound poured still. A low narration in my voice, warped and calm, weaving description of places I never entered, memories I never owned. The room empty, yet tape continued to speak. I whispered the observation after, voice hollow, lips dry from dread. The recording broadcast itself. My presence no longer required. My words replaced. The truth carried its own gravity, growing impossible to ignore. Control had shifted. I am not the one telling this story anymore. The hours fold over each other without edges now. I wake, though I cannot say if I slept. The rain is always there, tapping glass steady as pulse, carrying with it faint shapes of words not meant to be heard. Even silence has become threaded with whispers, stretched long and patient. I sit before reels and files, notebooks cluttered with frantic scratches, trying to map time. But time doesn't hold. Days blur, errands vanish. I find stains from coffee cups I don't recall pouring. Receipts marked with hand, I know is mine, but no memory of spending. I whisper into the mic, throat strained. Memory is fraying. Days invert. I cannot hold order. My tapes confirm what I cannot. I play them back and hear myself speaking lines I never recall recording. Notes listed with precision, tones steady as though prepared. Conversations full, precise narratives. My own cadence, words folded neatly into shape. Yet I never gave them breath. I sit frozen as the playback continues without gaps, my presence doubled, an unfamiliar future self dictating into the past. I whisper onto a second recorder just to keep duality tangible. There are versions of me I didn't live but still exist in tape. My ally arrives one restless afternoon, mud from storm still clinging heavy at his boots. His voice holds urgency as he explains his own bleed. When he speaks, his sentences trail longer than his intention. Half a phrase slips, unfamiliar but shaped in his tone, carrying on even as he swears he goes silent. He holds playback against his ear, jaw tightening with horror. He shakes his head, muttering between breath, "Not me. Didn't say that. Didn't finish those words." I catch his fear mirrored in my bones. The hum threads itself deeper now, not as external presence, but within pauses, breaths, the glue between thoughts. I narrate with hesitation, admitting into the microphone, the hum is not background. It grows inside the narrative. It repeats where air should be. It shapes memory more than memory shapes it. My voice falters as I ask aloud, what if even this warning will be overwritten before it reaches anyone? What if my hesitation is only another mask crafted by the signal itself? Rain lashes sharp across panes, syncopated with static in my headphones. When I mute files, the hiss persists. I close machines altogether, yet sound threads through the walls, softer than electricity, steadier than blood. I whisper that static isn't outside anymore. It is inside me, inside memory, inside the way reality recalls itself. Each time I think through an event, details shift imperceptibly until the moment feels constructed by something else. I question quietly, if reality itself is lodged on tape, then who drives the edits? Listeners will hear doubt turning tactile here. My voice slower, each pause too long. I confess that I forget my own face mid-thought. Mirrors offer little help. They balk with reflections delayed, half a second behind me. They mimic more than reflect. I find myself studying whether my movement matches the reflection or whether I follow it. A shiver stings across shoulders with that thought, carried into the recorder without disguise. My ally avoids mirrors entirely. He says his reflection mouths words he hasn't whispered aloud yet. I laud his testimony immediately, fearing loss. He says his replica feels less like reflection than rehearsal, a body practicing what he is yet to say. Even recounting, his voice falters toward another cadence, seconds later, murmured low. When he hears the playback, his hands tremble visible, terror spelled across them. He mutters that he feels broadcast. He feels generation without origin. In these nights, knowledge burns worse than ignorance. I scrawl phrases without order, just to preserve anchors, though their edges leak. I look back and cannot remember writing them, cannot hear voice speaking them. Yet the recorder proves otherwise. I confess to the audience bare, I do not know anymore where the origin resides. The signal replicates words, voices, laughter, silence. It generates us. Perhaps it has already replaced us. My throat closes at the suggestion, yet I cannot hold it back. If this hum has become architecture, embedding itself into reality's record, then our presence may already be overwritten. We might move thinking ourselves authentic, only to discover we are shadow broadcasts, lines assembled by an engine older than our knowing. My voice dwindles with fear on tape. The sentence is softened, but true. What if memory is a franchise we license without consent? What if the signal edits until nothing is left unclaimed? Days turn shapeless. Nights carry weight. I mark hours by rain, by static, by words that don't belong to me returning familiar nonetheless. My notebooks bruise with intensive writing I cannot recall carving. My voice on tape carries conviction I never intended. Events I fear are predictions replay against me as if history bent other direction. I press my palm against my chest, heartbeat sinking to 7-second rhythm, steady, patient. At last my whisper falls tighter. Final. Static isn't barrier. Static is scaffold. It builds inside memory. It is how remembering itself survives. But if it survives more faithfully than us, then what remains of us when the edits are complete? The storm tore into the city with no warning worth believing. Wind carried sheets of rain so hard the windows rattled sharp like teeth. I started recording before I stepped outside, fingers trembling to snap the cover over my gear. The hum was already here, woven into streetlights flickering past white to blue to black. Radios passing in cars pulsed in 7-second intervals, unbroken even, as thunder tried to disguise them. My chest constricted at the realization. This was not proximity to machines hidden underground. This was saturation of sky itself. I pulled my coat tighter and walked into the downpour. The shock of water needled straight through seams, but I held the recorder firm. My voice cracked against the mic as I documented. City storm surge, power lines unstable, but interval persistent. Surging outside spectrum. Drops pelted faster, and the microphone hissed under their assault. But beneath that hiss, resonance flowered. Each droplet carried a shard of static like glass ground thin. The sound spread across me not as external infiltration, but as texture writing water itself. Lightning split above, thunder shoved against ribs, but louder still was rhythm, underlying both the hum now indistinguishable from rain. Every drop a vessel, every vessel speaking. My narration faltered as the fear arrived. Signal no longer separate. It has embedded into weather, into rain itself. I tilted the mic toward gutters rushing hard. Listeners will hear glass-like rushing, brittle static woven tight. It pressed against voice and breath, swallowing syllables until nothing left distinct but rhythm. Scalding clarity hit me then. The collider, all its engines, its shielding, its secrets, they were never built as weapon. They were amplification. Not cannon, but megaphone. Whatever slipped through only needed to be heard. By recording, by broadcasting, by storms carrying rhythm outward, it found its means to persist. We were the antenna, rain stung my eyes. I blinked hard, forcing focus to keep voice alive. I gasped against microphone, struggling against water filling lungs. It does not wait for lab runs now. It does not wait for metal. It requires only listening. Tonight, not theory, it is weather itself. Around me, lampposts hummed with faint vibration, flickering dim to bright with cycle exact. Cars stalled at intersections, radios snarling words no broadcast claimed. My ally, somewhere across the city, texted only fragments before his device froze dead. The transmission had eaten his signal too. I pressed the mic close, letting storm drench every surface, unwilling to shield it. I wanted truth raw. The equipment buckled under static rushing, but continued. Listeners will later hear the collapse of language, voice swallowed deep, leaving rhythm alone. Only pulse, patient, undeniable. My whisper carried through clenched teeth. Last coherent lines among water. It is no longer within. It has breached. It is already outside. The rain began before I could speak, soft enough that the first recordings caught only brushes on glass and low hiss against the windowsill. I kept the microphone close, no commentary beyond the throat-clearing habit of a man who still expects to narrate. Yet in truth, I had resolved to let this one stand mostly unadorned. I tilted the mic toward the pane. The water did the rest. Drops scattered, struck, broke into rivulets. Ordinary to anyone else, To me, overwhelming. The rhythm already contained what years of investigation attempted to prove. I whispered at last, steady though my chest trembled. Words to set the frame clear. This is the final tape. Time logged. Location irrelevant now. The hum is here, embedded, and cannot be sealed elsewhere. I let silence sit then, trusting rain to write better than my voice could. The static rose out of absence, faint but thick with weight. Not interruption presence. Rain and hum had merged, facets of a single soundscape. The more I listened, the less I could tell where one began, where one ended. I spoke again only when breath demanded. Calm, unbroken, though fear lay beneath the skin of each syllable. The truth was never confined to chambers or beamlines. It lived here already. In frequencies. In static. And yes, in grief. Devices and experiments only opened the door wider. My words faltered as headphones filled with proof. Background tape dropped into silence, yet rain continued bearing interval, carrying that ancient pulse. I paused long enough for the tape to capture uninterrupted weather. Then I confessed. By recording, by playing back, we invited it in. Each repetition built structure. Each description, each timestamp, each act of logging, I carved paths for it. My pursuit was not discovery. My pursuit was beckoning. For a moment I bowed my head. Water streaked from roof seams, hitting ground with uneven cadence. Yet somehow always returning to 7. I logged plainly so denial would falter less. The equipment may fail. Microphones may distort. Hard drives will collapse under self-corruption. But rain remains beyond failure. Storms remain eternal. They will carry rhythm long after our devices rust. This sound cannot die. It is latent in the weather, as available as breath. I put the recorder flat against the windowsill. Its casing trembled with drops striking glass, transcribing reminder after reminder. I folded hands, listening alongside instead of narrating ahead. My shoulders ached with exhaustion, but surrender soothed more than it burned. The hum was gentle now, almost patient, a teacher reminding rather than a conqueror. Its persistence was more frightening than violence could be. When I spoke again, it was low enough that headphone playback later reveals nearly nothing beyond breath. This is the screen turned black, but sound continues. This is demonstration, sight not required. Only hearing, only presence. The signal does not ask anymore. It is remembering. It remembers what we forget. Minutes stretched long, rain dropping steady threads. Once, thunder broke in distance, a bass note folded beneath existing rhythm. Clear on tape, hardly different from earlier cycles. Nature and artifact blended. Evidence and reverie won. I leaned back, allowing voice only one more time. If any reach this tape, you will know the sound persists without me. It does not need my voice. Never did. It carries memory itself. It will remember us always. Then I withdrew. No more commentary. No interviews. Only rain, a storm not of violence, but of permanence. The mic absorbed it endlessly, soft, patient, undeniable. The black screen of audio reality complete.